Greetings to all of you. I am Paul-André Durocher, the Archbishop of Gatineau, the Apostolic Administrator of Mont-Laurier. Yesterday in Quebec and in Ontario, we received some very strong direction on how we enter into basically what is a new phase in our fight against this coronavirus. We are invited as much as we can to stay at home. All businesses, all commerces are being closed except for those that are judged essential. And we are invited to have the least contact we can have with other people so that this virus is not transmitted from one person to another. Even people who do not show symptoms can be carrying the virus. And so we need to take this time to isolate each other in order to protect ourselves, but also to protect those who are more vulnerable than us, and not to overload our health system that has to take care of the more vulnerable. And so as we enter into this, we enter more deeply into a kind of more radical Lenten season. Today, March 24th, is Tuesday of the fourth week of Lent. The liturgy proposes starting at the fourth week of Lent that we read John's Gospel. And today we'll be looking at John's Gospel, the fourth chapter. And from day to day, every day we will continue to read John's Gospel. And the first reading is always chosen from the Old Testament in a way that connects with the Gospel reading. So let's take a look at these readings. The first from Ezechiel, the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 47, verses 1 to 9 and 12. This is from the end of Ezekiel's book. Ezekiel is one of these prophets who lived during the exile, that 70-year period during which the Israelites were not allowed to live in Jerusalem or around Jerusalem. They had been exiled, sent away. Most probably, Jeremiah found himself in Tel Aviv. And Ezekiel is, it's Ezekiel I'm talking about. And Ezekiel was a strange character because until the tragedy of the destruction of Jerusalem occurred, he kept on telling people, Jerusalem will be destroyed. You need to change your way. You are completely mistaken in what you are doing. He was hard on the people, and he was telling them, preaching doom and gloom, you know. And as soon as this experience of the loss of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, it's as if his heart was changed. And he realized that what the people needed to hear was a message of hope, a message of encouragement. At least in his prayer, God spoke to him this way. And so the second half of his book is a book that is much more, in a sense, constructive. A book that calls people to move forward, to look towards the future, to build for the future. And at the end of the book, he becomes practically surreal. It's as if he's having these dreams and he's writing these dreams. And in one of these visions or dreams, he imagines a new temple being built, which is beyond human capacity, you could say, beyond human understanding. And he builds this, he describes this new temple in exquisite detail. He's practically doing an architect's work. But in chapter 47, he lets go of the actual description of the building itself, and he speaks about a spring of water underneath the temple that comes out. It's a magical spring of water, you could say. And let's remember that for Ezekiel, the temple, that's where God abides. It's God's dwelling place, God's home. So he writes, in the midst of the vision I received from the Lord, the angel brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and there water was flowing from below the threshold of the temple towards the east, for the temple faced east. And the water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. And then the angel brought me out by way of the north gate, because there's a huge wall that is built all around the temple precinct. And so the angel brings him outside of that wall, brought me out by the north gate, and led me around on the outside to the outer gate that faces towards the east. And the water was coming out on the south side. So then he describes what happens to this water. Going on eastward with a cord in his hand, the man measured 1,000 cubits, half a kilometer to a kilometer, and he led me through the water, and the water was ankle deep. And again he measured 1,000, and he led me through the water, and it was knee deep. And again he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, it was up to the waist. And again he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not cross, for the water had risen. It was deep enough to swim in, a river that could not be crossed. It's a strange stream that as it flows away from its source just builds up and builds up and builds up. It does not dissipate, does not flow into the ground. It simply becomes a huge river. And the description of this river is remarkable. The angel said to me, "Mortal, have you seen this?" And he led me back along the bank of the river. And as I came back, I saw on the bank of the river a great many trees on the one side and on the other. And he said to me, "This water flows towards the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah." The Arabah is where the Dead Sea is. I was fortunate enough to visit Israel and to go to the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea really is a dead sea. It's in a deep valley. The Jordan flows down towards it, but it is so deep, it is under the sea level, so that no water can flow out of it. No water flows out of this lake. It's a dead end. And so the water that flows in brings it with it, sand and silt and soil and the salts that are in there. And that salt does not evaporate as the water evaporates, so that the concentration of salt grows to the point that nothing can live in the sea. There are no fish, nothing along the sides, there are no trees. Everything is poisoned by this strong concentration of salt. But here, in Ezekiel's vision, when the stream from the temple goes down into the Arabah, it enters the sea of stagnant waters. The waters will become fresh. Wherever the river grows, every living creature that swarms will live, and there will be very many fish. Once these waters reach there, this Dead Sea will become alive again. It will become fresh, and everything will live where the river goes. On the banks, on both sides of the river, there will grow all kinds of trees for food, and their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail, but they will bear fresh fruit every month. That's incredible. Trees bear fruit once a year. Here, no, every month they will bear fruit, because the water for them flows from the sanctuary. You see, it is water from the home of God. It is God's presence that is actually transforming the Dead Sea into a sea of life. The fruit of these trees will be for food, and their leaves will be for healing. What a remarkable image that Ezekiel has of God's presence being a source of healing, of life, of nourishment, of vitality. So let's go to the gospel now. John 5, 1-16. There was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate there's a pool called in Hebrew Bethzatha, which has 5 porticos. This, by the way, has been verified. Archaeologically, we have rediscovered this pool in Jerusalem where near a gate and the 5 porticos, all of that has been rediscovered. Now, near these porticos, there lay many invalids, blind, lame, paralyzed. Because what would happen is the water would surge once in a while from this source. The water would surge, and the surging water, people believed it was an angel that was stirring the water, and so they felt the first one that gets in will be healed by that stirring water. So there's one man who had been there, who had been ill for 38 years. 38 years. This man is unable to walk. That's a lifetime. In Jesus's time, that was a lifetime, basically. This man has never been able to walk. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, Jesus said to him, "Do you want to be made well? Do you want to heal?" Now think back to Ezechiel's story, about the healing that is brought by this river, this source of water. And this man thinks that yes, the waters will heal me, but there's a problem. He says, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. I have no one to help me. No one is there at all." So not only is this man lame, crippled, he is completely isolated, completely alone. He has no one for him. So that while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me. So Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." And at once the man was made well, and he took up his mat, and he began to walk. John's meaning is very clear here. The man didn't have to go into this pool of water, even if it was kind of a holy water, even if it was water that came from the temple, because you're right next to the temple there in Jerusalem. No, Jesus is the source of that living water. In chapter 3, Jesus says that to the Samaritan woman. If you asked me to drink, I would give you water and it would flow up within you for eternal life. Jesus is the source of that living, healing power that is symbolized by this water in this pool. Now that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It's the Sabbath. You don't have the right to carry your mat around, because on Sabbath day you're not supposed to do any work, and carrying your mat, that's work." Jesus answered them, the man answered them, "Well, the man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" He obviously doesn't know who Jesus is, but he told me, "Take up your mat and walk." They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, take it up and walk?" It strikes me here that it's remarkable that this man is walking. They should be astounded. Who's the man that made you get up? No, they say, "Well, who is it the man who made you break the Sabbath law?" We kind of get stuck sometimes on secondary issues and we miss the big picture. Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd. Later, Jesus did find him in the temple. Note, in the temple. He finds him in the temple and says to him, "See, you have been made well." Listen to Jesus' words now. "Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you." Jesus is saying there's something worse than being crippled. There's something worse than being 38 years lying there on the ground. Something worse than not being with anyone to give you a hand. What is that worse? It's being cut off from the source of true life, being cut off from the source of vitality that is Jesus himself, being cut off from the source of healing. That's worse. And how do we cut ourselves off? That's what sin is. It's cutting ourselves off from God. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. And therefore the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. I think the message is clear for us today. We might be alone. We might be sick. And we wish we had people with us and we wish we were well, and all of that is good. But there's something even more essential. It is the source of life. What gives meaning to our encounters with others? What gives meaning to our health? What gives meaning to our very lives? What will give meaning to our death? Because we will all die. It is Jesus who gives that meaning. Jesus is the source of vitality, of health, and of healing. Jesus is the one we need to go to. And so let us, in this time that is so hard for many of us to bear, let us not be afraid of going to Jesus. He is full of mercy, and he is always present to us. He comes to us. We don't have to go to him. The man next to that water, he couldn't go to the water. He didn't have anybody to bring him. Jesus went to him. Jesus comes to us. He comes to us in prayer. He comes to us in love. He comes to us through his word. Let us welcome Jesus, and let us find our source of healing and strength in him. He really is the living water. God bless.